Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of a series that has no name. We're off to a great start, and it's going to be myself, Atano Circus, and awildxan. We're going to be talking about Commander. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Game Changers. If you've been in a Magic the Gathering based hole, then you might not have learned that the CFP, or the Commander Group, has come out with a 5-bracket system that we can now use that supplements or replaces outright the 1 to 10 system that people used to have when they're discussing what Commander games they were looking for to describe the power level of their decks, what kind of play experience they were looking for. It was a brilliant article by Gavin Verhey that goes over what these are, and there's just one problem. I've heard two sides of an argument, and I don't think they can ever reconcile. One is that this talks about play experience, therefore the bans, or specifically the Game Changers, a list of 40 cards that are going to augment the banned list to help you find the appropriate power level, the appropriate play experience. They don't quite do their job. And for people who are worried about bad actors or want something a bit more concrete as the Commander format is maturing, they're really upset that this Game Changers list is kind of this weird complex ban that nevertheless fails to capture all of the bad actors, or who I would suspect are people that just don't have the same level of experience, game knowledge, card pool knowledge, etc. So, talking with me, awildxan and I are going to go over the Game Changers list because there's this interesting idea, awildxan, that I've heard of, and there's this group called Pokemon Showdown, a group called Smogon, and they've come up with this pretty smart tier system where they have the exact same problem. Everyone is looking for a different 1v1 Pokemon environment where they can use strong Pokemon against each other, but they're obviously not all equal, right? Pachirisu and Rayquaza are not, in fact, equally statted, have equal capabilities. And the tier system that they use is very similar to what you're seeing on your screen now, everyone else, where basically something gets put in a tier, and if it's banned at that tier and can't be used below it. So I thought that would be an interesting idea. I haven't seen anyone take on that work. And I've always said content creation is about just going ahead and putting out work into the world that, frankly, you wish someone else had done, but no one else had done it. So with that, awildxan, welcome. Any thoughts? What do you want to get started with? What's your background? Why should people care about what we have to say?
So my name is Zan. I essentially have no good reason that anyone should listen to what I have to say when it comes to Magic. I don't have any real
Good
stats that I
start.
can show you that say, oh
Great.
yeah, I'm a great player. I've judged small events, nothing like RCQs or anything like that. Just organized things and been a TO for some time.
Good.
I have
What
a background just playing some CEDH with a lot of friends. Essentially playing all different levels of Commander, traveling for different constructed formats like Standard and Modern, just going to smaller events and playing in RCQs, things like that. Largely, I've just tried to find my home by genuinely tackling every format at every play level. Love me some Pauper. Commander is the one where I love to offer my spicy takes and my rough opinions.
for Commander
Uh,
specifically, where have you been? Like, what did you play at your what we would generously call these various brackets?
I played when it comes to my CDH background, I played Kess for some time. I was a pretty bad Kess player, but had the privilege of playing against a lot of very strong players at my local game store. Kess, Grixis are my colors. They're the things that I enjoy. They're colors of a lot of insanely powerful cards. Blue black, of course, being just dominant. I've played decks like my Treasures Actually, named after Love Actually, featuring Hugh Grant with Forge Neverwinter Charlatan.
Okay.
That being a deck that I intended to be low power, and then I learned the hard way that when your game plan is removal, it kind of doesn't matter what what power level or tier you're playing at.
Mm-hmm.
Which that I'm sure that deck will get brought up again sometime, and
In the next hour or
um,
whatever this is, you should know.
yeah,
I should have
however long.
I should have warned you. I'm physically incapable of making content that's under an hour and 30 minutes, so we're definitely gonna have some time to fill in here about it. And as for
I'm the youngin. I've got plenty of time.
there we go. And for my end, I have never played full power CEDH. The closest I came is I played Riel the Everwise, pulling a list that was at one time CEDH or seeking to fit in those environs, but it was a bit old by the time I played it. So I would say that and Voha, or Voja, depending on your pronunciation, are both generally considered bracket 4 decks. And then at one point I got tired with the attitude of some players and rifled through my store's extra bin to make what is ostensibly a tier 1, like bracket 1, not tier 1, bracket 1 Glissa Sunslayer list, only to discover, much like you did with Hugh Grant, that actually if your game plan is to have a lot of good removal, that's pretty good. So I thought this would be interesting, like give us a mix of personalities, a mix of experience levels, and just go over this. And for anyone at home, and so Zan and I are playing by the same rules, anything that we put in this list that is banned at that level can't be played at that bracket or anything below it. So if for some reason we put something that we think should be in the CEDH ban list, spoiler, I don't think there's going to be too many things in there, but if we decide to do that, then nothing else can be played. And obviously you can see a tier at the bottom there called Remove from Game Changers, which just says, I mean, really, is this a problem? Is this a big issue? Really? Is anyone dying to this in 2025? So we're going to be constantly referencing back to the document that was made. So we'll get into some of those conversations, but I assume good faith on the part of most people here that they've read the article. They have some idea as to what the 5 tiers or the 5 brackets are trying to put out, and we'll bring that up as we're figuring out what should be, banned or not in our own opinion. So with that, anything else you want to add, Zan, before we go ahead and get started? It's only 40 cards. We got plenty of time.
Oh yeah, only 40. It probably should be more like in the realm of 200, but that's okay.
Okay, first take. Maybe that's future take. Content. Maybe that's future content. This first one will only be the game changers. We might do
just covering these cards here.
We might do the existing ban list or like saltlet cards that should be on the list or something later, right? But this is part of taking the article on its face. Mass land destruction does a good job of stopping Armageddon from being on the list, for instance.
Just like a slightly late day one discussion on what happened in that article, what like our initial thoughts are on these changes to what was essentially Rule 0 conversations, and having an official, like, this is a deterministic way to say this is what my deck's strength level is. It's not meant to be opinionated. It's meant to actually put, in the context of what's in your 99.
Right. If we were the God Emperors of mankind, the goal would be that if this list were taken at face value and stamped with approval, it would then go on like a Mox field or something, and it says, well, I have evaluated all of the cards in your deck, and I have to tell you, this is bracket level 2, right? Which is what I think a lot of people were looking for. So let's get started. Wildcat. Speaking of something kind of wild, we have Ad Nauseam. Where are we putting Ad Nause? I'm going to assume people know cards unless you think that like we really have to go over it. I'm just putting all the cards by default down here in a section so people can take a look at them.
So Ad Nause, of course, something that I've cast plenty of times. I've seen cast so many times in both watching YouTube content and just hearing people talk and casting it myself and having it cast on me, very unfortunately. Flipping that one blasphemous act that I still had in my deck that one time.
Pretty expensive.
I
ideal.
definitely think Ad Nause is the first of many cases on this list that expresses a card that might itself not really be the problem.
Okay.
Ad Nause is still a build around. There is, like on Moxfield, when you're building a deck, you can, if Ad Nause is in it, they literally give you a special statistic regarding your mana cost. It still does require you to be intentional in your deck building. Okay. Ad Nause is a card that I don't think is truly an issue at the highest level. It is very prominent, but so are a million other things at the highest level.
Okay.
And at the same time, once you take that step down to being higher power, it's immediately a bit worse. It's like if you're not taking it on to a true, like, oh yeah, I'm going to Ad Nause, it's just going to draw me the cards that win me the game, and then I'm genuinely going to have the mana to cast them.
Yes.
When your deck is like that, that deck's probably a CDH deck. You're not, you're not considering things at the lower tier. I think that Ad Nause is a card that doesn't really, like, it could be in an optimized list still, but putting it in an upgraded list, like, of course, it's still, like, Ad Nause gets weaker the lower it is on the tier of these decks, but It's
They're like,
also something that you could still manage to build around at these lower levels, and the value that it can generate when it even doesn't instantly win the game, if you're playing like a life gain strategy or something like that, or aristocrats,
mm-hmm.
um, maybe that one card is just too valuable in that type of strategy. And it's also just something that's such a power card that you probably don't want to see it at a level that is lower than the higher levels of optimized or seed.
Sure. For anyone who's not tracking, Upgraded here is bracket 3. So I have an interesting story
Mhm.
from another state, because one of the things I think makes this interesting is I have seen Commander played over a dozen stores in as many states. And people do play very differently. Overseas, for I'm American, so overseas versus the East Coast versus the middle of the country, the West Coast, the South, the North, etc. The first time that I saw someone not know what Adnaz was, they were like, "Oh, they're gonna lose if they lose all that life," and I was like, "No, the game is over. Actually, we don't get to play anymore. Like
Mhm.
they're
Is
gonna
there an answer?
huh? Yeah, is
It's
there an
like, is there
answer?"
an answer
And if there
immediately?
wasn't, it's like, "Oh, okay." And that poor person didn't understand that was the context of what was happening. But Adnaz also, this, I don't want to say it self-regulates, therefore it's not a problem. But like you're saying, the most that I see Adnaz actually get played is when you're playing optimized, at which point the entire point, as per that article, right, that I mentioned previously, and let me
Mhm.
just find the exact text because it's helpful here, is bring out your strongest decks and cards, explosive starts, strong tutors, cheap combos that end games, mass land destruction, etc. So the idea there is, well, if you're playing a game that only goes to turn 4, maybe to turn 6, then is a 5 mana instant actually too bad to end the game? Probably not. I wouldn't want this to get kicked out of optimized groups,
Mhm.
right? Because you can still build Adnaz badly.
Yeah,
I've
we
seen
we
it
can still
happen.
also in optimized we can still play a lot of free mana. We can still like get that like high mana going
Yeah.
in colors that traditionally couldn't in these lower tiers now
Yeah.
because of what else is on this list.
I'm kind of fine
Um,
with. And by the way, just very quickly, there's already going to be people saying I know who are going to say, if you're just going to put a lot of these in 3, then aren't you misunderstanding the game changers list? I don't like complex bans because I'm not going to deck check every person who has a card,
yes.
right? So we're not
Mhm.
force of will if you've ever played that game, right? It's not that complex bans can't work, but are we really going to have people privately check the decks of everyone else to make sure that they have this small, like this defined number of them and they're not cheating in some way? It's just easier to say it is or is not allowed at this level. Because, spoiler, not all of the game changers are going to end up on the same spot on our ban list.
Yeah.
So actually, even though we picked like, oh, it's going to end up as a 3, I just want to give people that warning. Do you think it should be upgraded, like banned from upgraded?
I do think so. I think
Okay.
that a large point that I'm probably going to make multiple times here in this
Mm,
discussion is that the card pool knowledge is king in Commander, and it's the number one cause of unhappy games. I think it's just that a point that I've made to you before is that let's say that you were in that upgraded precon level, tier
yes.
3,
Mm-hmm.
and you are building your deck, and another person is building their deck. Now, what
Yes.
if every card that you put in your deck is about like a 5 out of 10 power level card? You know that it's pretty good. And then that one other person, they just know the 6 out of 10s and the 7 out of 10s that are
Sure.
doing roughly the same thing.
Like a good example would be, I
Mhm.
did this in reverse for Glissa Sunslayer, but a good example would be if I was like, wow, Croson Grip is super cool. 3 mana. Let's go ahead and do that, man. Split Second is neat. And there's another person who knows that Nature's Claim is a card. And it's just like, no, actually, we're just going to use Nature's Claim. And I don't even know that card
Yeah.
exists, right?
Yeah,
That's going to be a problem.
and that disparity still could cause issues with ad nauseum being
Mm,
allowed along those upgraded decks and that like general power level.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think that people can still just play very low average CMC decks in that level, and like I said about the life gain and
They
certain
might
strategies,
accidentally
it
like
might just
draw.
be too good there.
Well, they might accidentally draw 10 cards. At which point you're like, do you want people to accidentally draw 10 cards?
Hmm.
Probably not. So let's get into the next one, I think. Ancient Tomb. Now, I'm going to start listen, we have to have spicy takes, right? I actually think the only place Ancient Tomb should be banned is from Exhibition. I think this card beautifully self-selects. And the reason I say that is that up until about 4, most every game is Battle Cruiser. Most every game is someone, no one is doing, like, I saw Trinket Mage make an excellent video where he said, I built a budget Archelops and I used Scape Shift to go get Maze's End, and that was really cool. It was worth the $50. Again, card pool knowledge, like you were saying, most people who have $50 to spare, they're playing like a green-white commander that, like, every time it swings makes 2 1/1s and then untaps if you have 10 creatures or something.
Yeah.
It's all Battle Cruiser, so losing, especially these games are meant, according to the article, to last longer than about 9+ turns before someone wins. So are you going to take 18 damage in Battle Cruiser Timmy Land? I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean that's what you're going to encounter for the most part. Yeah, it might be too strong for Exhibition because, Spirits streaming is actually just going to be too good. Hey, Aku TV.
The description given for the lowest tier, just tier 1,
yes,
Exhibition, the description given for it is a lot of like playing theme decks, like building something where like you're just playing your favorite artist or something like that. And that's a point where like there probably is going to be very few cards here that we think can be straight up removed from this list.
Yes.
Just because that is a specific thing where it's like, Sol Ring, sure, make it legal and everything, Identity of Commander, whatever
you want to. We'll get back to that maybe in a different talk.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do that one right now. We'll get kicked off the internet.
Can we also play like Ancient Tomb, and can we start like playing Grim Monolith at that level?
Yeah.
No, like it's something where that tier sounds as if it's trying to avoid the ordinary, so much so that having these generic cards that are that good, they shouldn't be able to be played there. It's just going to become a game of like who actually has it or not.
Yes.
One person is going to have their deck built around that theme, then with 10 staples that are just going to be able to take over the game completely, and then another person's going to have their deck that's just that theme. And that's not something that would be fun.
My idea for Exhibition, based on the article I read and the Q&A that was answered, is that Exhibition, if we imagine there's a sliding scale between I want to win every single time at the CEDH bracket 5 level, and I want to play a cooperative PvP game, right? Exhibition is pretty close to cooperative PvP game, and I don't think Ancient Tomb can find itself there. Like, the advantages stack up too much. But I've seen some crazy precons. I'll put it this way, right? I think the average bracket 2 game is more affected by Scoot Swarm than by Ancient Tomb. You know what I mean? Yep. So I'm fine with that. Aku Aku's correct. He says Ancient Tomb would be OP for Death Shadow style decks. I would actually be totally fine. If Sol Ring is going to be a weird exception, I'm totally fine with a precon having Ancient Tomb, right? Now, the Ancient Tombs I'm sitting on in my binders wouldn't be too happy with me, but you know what I mean? Like, it scales really well.
Yeah.
Let's get to the next one then. Oh, here we go. We got to scroll up. Bolas' Citadel. Here we go.
Bolas' Citadel.
Bolas' Citadel. Well, first off, we're probably not going to ban anything from CEDH, but here's the thing about Bolas' Citadel is that the effect is you can look at the top card of your library anytime, and you may play the top card of your library, and then you pay life to go ahead and do that. I feel like you can't keep that too low because it's kind of like Adnaz. It's going to be way too strong. Right? Like, even here's the thing. Aku makes a good point in the Twitch chat. It's uber busted, but it's because people will put it in because they're like, I'm making my Dragon God based deck, or I'm trying to power up my God Pharaoh deck, because I know people who have that because Nicol Bolas is one of the Elder Dragon Highlander commanders, like back when it was EDH instead of Commander. And people would be like, oh, I want to play Bolas' Citadel. I've seen this in 2 separate stores in 2 separate states, and every time they're like, well, I didn't mean to take a 30-minute turn. And it's like, yeah, I'm not surprised. It happens every time, though.
Yeah, I think that Citadel is a card where, like, It's specifically going to work with certain things at higher levels that make it a lot stronger because it can't compete as much with those great cards up there. I don't think it's a bit more niche. Of
Yep.
course, my opinions are pretty outdated on what's going on specifically in CEDH. But my knowledge of the card pool still feels like it applies very well to the
Yes.
optimized lists.
Aku even
Bolas
makes a
and
good point here,
Citadel,
like Gary and stuff like that. Like if you're just playing black-white aristocrats and you put in Bolas' Citadel because the effect does something else you want to do, like you just run away with the game and you don't mean to win. It just happens.
upgraded decks, I think, can put up a fight against Bolas's Citadel, but also you could just slam it for 6 mana, and then you could play like 3/6 drops off the top of your deck for 18 life, and it
Mm-hmm.
could just be something that just literally wins you the game on the spot, just kind of, randomly blows up. It's an artifact in black. There's a lot of things that are just going to help it. Um,
Yes.
and like its own individual power, I could see it being enough for it to be banned in this tier 3 and below.
Yes.
But I do think that there's a very valid argument for how much of a fight the upgraded decks can put up against it. Like overall, we've seen that precons are a lot stronger at base. We've seen like a lot more removal and interaction
Yeah.
coming out lately. That's a lot more premier things that actually, you could find in a booster pack
Yep.
and just put in your deck, and it will make an actual impact and be very strong. The issue is that Bolas' Citadel still has to be answered immediately.
Yes.
If it's
And
going
you
to
can respond off of it, right? If someone's trying to kill it, you can just say in response to that at any time. That's the thing you love to say, at any time.
Yeah, you will just have the chance. It's like Tinker is just straight up banned, and for good reason.
Yes.
As it should be.
Yep. What do you think it should actually just not be allowed in upgraded? Because here's the thing: at 6 mana, we're getting very close to the game. You're playing an upgraded deck like you're playing bracket 3. If we look, bracket 3 says not only do they think they should have some, but there shouldn't be any 2-card infinites before the first 6 turns or so of the game. Like, I'm of the opinion the game has to end somehow. Like, if it ends because of Bolas' Citadel in bracket 3, whatever, man. It's 6 mana, and if you're like, actually, Crick could get it out on turn 1, if you're already like,
yeah, we're already in that competitive mindset that's referenced for the CEDH.
Yes.
I think that I'm really tied between like it could totally deserve to be banned for 3 and below.
Yes.
It also is like,
because you are in 2 especially, the reason I think 2 should be banned is you are going to get to turn 6 without someone dying. Like, that's just the nature of bracket 2, right?
Like once people are on 6 mana in these upgraded decks, or like, I've played plenty of games with just upgraded precons and just, jamming out like that true battle cruiser commander.
Yes.
And the difference is that people are now playing these huge spells that are just going to really change the game. And when you get to that high of a mana cost that everyone has access to, you expect more that somebody's going to be able to pay that, play a card, and become the biggest enemy at the table right away. Like it's something that's just totally happens.
Okay.
I think that's something that Citadel does that a lot of other cards like that don't do, is that Citadel does it immediately.
Yeah, Citadel does like the we're going to do probably later cards that have been banned, like not this talk but some later talk we're going to have, and it's kind of like the coalition victory logic, but unironically it's like, but did you sign up for someone to play this card and just immediately win the game? But it's more like Paradox Engine, where they didn't even mean to, it just happens. Like, you know
like
what?
I personally, I think tier 3 and below, it's just individually, like the argument that we gave for Adnaz is that it really isn't too strong on its own, but when it's with other things, it becomes a bit more of a problem. But at the same time, the value that it gives, it's an insanely good card. Adnaz is amazing.
Yeah.
It does not immediately change the entire game. on its own.
Yes. Yes. I can
Citadel
hear the
does.
Rockside players crying right now. Like everyone's like, "Do you even play CDH? Do you know that Rog is gonna just like immediately get flamed out and he's gonna cast Turbo at
Yeah, we
us?
just
Have you not heard of it, peasant?" Yes, we've heard of
Infernal
Turbo.
Plunge.
Yes, yes, we've heard.
We're
There we
doing
go.
it.
We know the cards. Thank you. We have heard of that before. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like Adnaz, you could do it for value and not quite know what you're doing and just think like, I'm a good enough Magic player to know what's going on here. Bolas Citadel is like, you could accidentally do it. So don't worry, everyone who's watching this. We are going to have stuff that's in like bracket 4 or bracket 1, 2, stuff like that. I say that, but we're going into Chrome Box. This is the next card.
Yes. A lot of these talks that we're going to have over all these mana rocks, I think, are going to be largely the same.
Yes.
The speed at which you're playing Commander,
yes,
matters a lot.
I discovered that when I was playing Voha, right? I just jammed all of the rocks that I had collected and earned and bought over the years, and it turns out that actually it doesn't matter how decent the effect is otherwise. People can't deal with a 5-mana Commander plus board state on turn 3. Right, or let alone turn 2,
and
right? They just can't do it.
The difference between a deck that is now getting to play like Chrome Mox and, looking at the list, like Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, not being as immediately free, not being as insane. Like Mana Vault and Grim Monolith, we might have some different takes on, or Mox Diamond. A deck that gets to play those cards is just genuinely immediately stronger. Than the decks that don't have them. And the question is just, do we think that upgraded decks, are we talking about upgraded as in those cards are just that much better, or that the entire deck is that much better? Because
I actually think this is getting close to like
bad cards or something.
No.
And to respond to
Baku
in the chat as well regarding Mox Opal.
Yeah, go for it.
Mopal still is something that gets passed over in like CDH and things like that. Just depending on what deck you're playing. And artifact count genuinely matters for if it's worth it to play Mopal. Like, I do think you could just build a casual deck and you could just play all the talismans and play Soul Ring and Arcane Signet and jam Mopal and it'll still be insane.
Yes.
But I do think it's something where it's still something that you have to consider in the entirety of your deck building. You still have to change what everything in your deck is.
Whereas Chrome Mox feels very much like, I don't know, what was it, like Simian Spirit Guide, Elvish Spirit Guide? Like, we're just going to jam it actually if we're in those colors. And that's kind of the problem, is that it does that, but it's permanent, right?
Yeah. Like, what's your opinion on like rocks like that in upgraded decks compared to the very high tiers where you would expect something like that?
I actually think that this is a core issue, because here's the thing. I can't in good faith say we're not allowed to have rocks when we have Soul Ring Signet, and those aren't even up for debate as the game changers. I mean, I would suspect for a financial reason or a monetary reason, or a make sure that there's no feel bads about people buying their like pre-con reason. But you probably shouldn't, like, if core is a pre-con level, man, I should not be sitting across the table from someone who just bought their upgraded, like, last year pre-con and playing Chrome Mox. I'm a bit of an asshole if I do that. But if we're playing upgraded, I assume that people are updating. I don't think you can fix the fact that, to me, Chrome Mox is an upgrade. To other people, Coiling Oracle is an upgrade. You know what I mean? So I actually would just ban it out of bracket 2. I just wouldn't want it around pre-cons, because then the starts you have are so dumb you actually can't keep up. Right? It's just beyond.
I can definitely agree with that. I think that when you get into upgraded decks, when you're like changing, more streamlining your game plan.
Oh, you're playing green dorks. Like, if you're playing green, you're playing Land of War elves. So, like, why wouldn't you be looking over at Chrome Mox as well, right?
Yeah, like you're able to do all of these things, and not every color can do them as well.
Yes.
When you're upgrading, I mean, when I first built Forge Neverwinter Charlatan, a large thing that I was like, okay, I'm just not going to put rocks in. That was a big thing that I did to make sure, like, my deck is very low to the ground. It's very, very low curve.
Yes.
I think that if I play rocks and I'm just jamming my entire hand on the table of just removal and getting a large commander,
Yes.
it might just it could be pretty bad and not fun for a lot of people. And that was definitely the case.
Yeah. And
But without it, at that lower level, it was still very playable. It was still like following the normal curve of things. You don't want to break how traditional Magic feels on that precon level.
yes, on that
Upgraded
that's
decks, though,
important.
I
Yes.
expect it more at every stage of the game. Like we talked about with Bolas' Citadel, where when you slam something for 6 mana in your upgraded decks, like you want it to be something that makes you the biggest enemy. You want it to be a very real threat that changes the game state.
Yes.
I think that you're still allowed to play the small accelerants in there. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my take for. I'll save other things for like the other rocks and things.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
We'll definitely have an opportunity to get to them because we have. I'm just gonna. Here we go. This is not where it's gonna live. Anyone who's on stream is like, Cyclonic Rift is not bracket 3. Okay. I know what your take is. I'm gonna say much the same thing. I actually think that if it were me, Bolas' Citadel would probably be bracket 3, only because you don't want Bolas' Citadel to do more than the person playing it thinks it can, and accidentally, oops, Paradox Engine win the game. No one.
Or did you mean to say a Cyclonic Rift?
No. I was saying that about Bolas' Citadel. However,
Okay.
for Cyclonic Rift, it's a contrast, right? No one accidentally overloads Cyclonic Rift. And I'm sorry, if you pay that much mana, the game should end, guys. Like, the game should not take 2 hours. At a certain point, someone has to come away with the W, right?
It still requires being ahead.
Yes.
The times where it's used as just a traditional like board wipe,
Yes.
which is very much so, that's non-zero. You have to use Cyclonic Rift sometimes.
Yes.
You have to board wipe sometimes when you're ahead. There's a lot of considerations.
Yes.
I
actually think this should be an exhibition only because things that are joke decks, like exhibition doesn't mean joke, but it is the idea of like it's only characters standing on a chair, or it's me rifling through a bulk pile to make a $35 budget commander and then going to win an F&M with it when everyone else is playing what this would call like bracket 3 decks. You don't want that to have to face Cyclonic Rift. It literally can't handle it. But I don't like in the spirit. That's where I'm at. It's like bracket 1 because if the game ends, it should be a bit goofy, and this is a bit like, oh, I guess it ends because of Cyclonic Rift. Where do you sit?
I can see where you're coming from with it, but there's one like glaring thing to me when it comes to the tier 2 that it just can't do in the face of something like Cyc Rift, and that is come back. Say that you Cyc Rift in a precon and you literally control 3 creatures, just like 3 4/4s or something.
Sure.
You can Cyc Rift, and it's going to take long enough for other people to build back that it might genuinely have just won you the game, even if the game didn't end the next turn.
Okay.
It's just going to still do it.
Sure.
It's just that getting back into the game is that much harder in the lower levels that I think it's still too
And then
strong.
at the higher levels, you're saying that you just win the game immediately if you cast it, right? Like if somehow you do overload it, you just win.
In a lot of cases, that's going to be how it is.
So you would ban it from core, from bracket 2, just to make sure there's not like a precon getting stuffed by. By the way, wild tier list already. Ancient Tomb could be played now in more decks than Cyclonic Rift.
What can I say? The things that are as generic as Ancient Tomb, I think that they don't have as much of a place here.
Sure.
DT.
Yep. Now, I actually owned an alpha one of these. I don't know if I ever told you that. It was sick. It was beautiful. DT. Sorcery, 1 black. Search your library for a card. Put it in your hand. Reshuffle your library afterwards. Listen, man. Okay, this is going to sound wild, but I played a lot of green-white, right? Yeah, Aku also says Rift was printed in 2 precons. I'm not being held hostage by what's been put in a precon. like even if they did it, that doesn't mean I have to agree with their logic, Aku. Yeah. I get what you're saying. It's actually a fantastic point, but like
many things.
It's like I'm not going to be like, well, I can't have an opinion because they fucked it up once upon a time. Like,
so Eminence wouldn't be a thing if it weren't for precons, probably.
Yes.
And
of course, yeah. Even if it
there's a
was
lot of
even if
things.
it was 20, by the way, just so that you don't think I'm getting hung up on the number 2 precons. Even if it was 20 precons had Psych Rift in it, Psych Rift is overwhelmingly superordinately powerful in those precon battles. People cannot fight back. But DT.
Mhm.
So here's the thing about DT, right? Ella Domri's Call is green-white instant to put a creature into your hand. And this is a sorcery, yeah, with an easier mana cost, but it is a sorcery. Like, come on, man. this
Mhm.
this can't be like that bad. I actually, here's the thing, this is wild. I don't think Demonic Tutor is actually that bad. In the same way that I don't think Ancient Tomb is that bad. Like,
You have heard it here first.
yeah.
Demonic Tutor is not that bad.
What I mean is, in terms of
I
impact
know.
on the play experience, right? It's like Ancient Tomb is actually totally covered by the fact that lower level gameplay is Timmy, and then higher level gameplay, pressuring the life total, is still an important part of your game plan, right? Like,
Yeah.
you pressure the person who could add Nas, etc. Demonic Tutor, I feel like, yeah, if you know that Saw in Half on a Bone Hoarder Dragon is really good, then yeah, you know you're going to go get a combo piece for it, right? If you know what Demonic Consultation is,
Mhm.
you're going to go get it. But if you have, like, an upgraded deck and your best card that you're getting out is Swords to Plowshares, so you can deal with this threat, like,
Yeah.
okay, like,
So what
where do,
Aku is saying in chat as well, like how it makes decks that run it less unique. It is very true.
yes.
Redundancy is one of those things that's like it's the most boring upgrade that you can make, but it's also often like the best thing that you can do. Um, Demonic Tutor is another one that's like it's just a tutor. How bad could it be until it's at these very high levels? And then at that point, everybody's doing it. The philosophy that's written about in that article
Yeah,
is
yeah.
more in tune with like we're all gonna play this.
Yeah, Optimize
Um,
says strongest decks and cards, explosive start, strong tutors is explicitly called out for bracket 4, right?
yeah.
And then to compare, bracket 3 says, it goes about 5 to
Mhm.
6 turns, and there's generally not any 2-card infinite combos that are cheap in the first 6 turns or so. So, like, maybe Demonic Tutor just has to be restricted away from precons, right?
That's kind of what I was thinking. It's also talked about in the article in tier 2 for
Yes,
core,
because
just
you,
that tutors should be sparse. And I think that makes that makes a lot of sense. It's
yeah.
adding that level of redundancy when decks are slightly weaker, when the
Oh,
bombs
that's
come down
bad.
much
Yeah,
later,
yeah. If you have a
when they don't
precon and
immediately win the game. Yeah.
yeah, if I have a precon and I slam Demonic Tutor, now it's just the best card in my precon. That's actually not the gameplay experience that you're looking for at this precon level. It is a bit about the wet and wild. Same for Exhibition, by the way, just a quick rehash for anyone who joined in recently. Everything that we're suggesting is banned at that level is also banned at every level below it, because it also defeats the point of an Exhibition for you to have Demonic Tutor just finding the same part of your deck over and over, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Like that is where, in these lower power decks, it's going to be extremely boring. It's just going to find the biggest bomb that you can find. It's going to find whatever piece you can play at the soonest time that will get you the furthest ahead.
yes.
And that's just not really like that's not a gameplay pattern that anything else in that tier 2 wants to really go for at a precon level.
Yep.
Aku referenced Stoneforge Mystic
You have no
in
idea
chat.
how
I'm a big
many
fan.
you have no idea
One of
how
my
many
favorite artworks.
Stoneforge packages I've actually main decked. I played Devoted Druid with a Stoneforge transformational side deck. Like, I'm actually that
Mhm.
guy. I love that card.
Stoneforge and things like that. It's like they're much more specific to what they're doing, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more going on.
Yes.
Um, when it comes to the depth of what's already in your deck. Like when you see a demonic tutor in somebody's 99, it's just a demonic tutor. That's all that it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's like in these lower power decks, that demonic tutor is probably just a second copy of like a gear hole or something like that, or a Sun
Yes, yeah,
Titan.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, things are much stronger now than I think that, but um, to that extent, I'm like, yeah, is this fun and is it even necessary? Um, Upgraded decks, go wild, go for it. Upgraded decks also are probably going to be able to find more value pieces with a demonic tutor. They're not just going to search the same thing every
They
time.
also have more interesting
Um,
lines with the demonic tutor. Like the
yeah.
casual or the if you've never played bracket 5 or even a lot of bracket 4, you would think that tutors find the same thing every time. But I'm not going to name names here, Zan, but we know people that have played and you can see that they do use their tutors to go grab the same thing every time when that's not optimal, right? There's actually more layers to it the harder
Yeah.
the higher the bracket level, right? So
Mhm.
you just don't want that at a pre-con level because then you're kind of getting away from the that nebulous spirit of the format, right?
Yeah.
Now, listen, I want you to know before I move this, I love playing decks that have white in them, right? I think any deck that lets me play Esper Sentinel is sick. Obviously, I have on my side of the screen Devoted Druid. If you think I don't play Swift Reconfiguration, you're missing out, right? You just haven't
Mhm.
thought it through. I think Drannith Magistrate has to be banned, even in bracket 4, because I have played with people, Zen, who have like a $2,500 Golos deck, or they have like Sharknado, or they have like the strongest Feather or Sigarda Heron's Host or whatever. You know, stuff that's
Mhm.
never going to make it to tier 5, to bracket 5. And they can't handle Drannith Magistrate. Like, it
Yeah.
actually is too much to ask for them to remove it because they also know. Like, I've heard this argument. I don't buy this argument, but I've also heard, yeah, the kinds of people who play Drannith Magistrate, they also play Winter Orb and all other kind of nonsense. No, they don't have to, right? You just have to be playing stuff like I played Voja, Friend to Elves, right? I played
Yeah.
the big wolf. He's Naya. He's a 5 cost commander in Naya. And when I was in my bracket 4 games or games that were at that rough power level, you better believe I'm jamming Drannith Magistrate because everyone's getting their commander before I am. And these
Yeah.
decks cannot handle it,
Drannith
dude.
Drannith is a card that just gets insanely better as the tiers go down. Just
Yes.
it genuinely, it's probably the biggest groan I've heard people let out. That
Yes.
being said, never had to play with people when Hull Breacher was legal.
Yes. I
Um,
did. I can
you
tell you
know,
that it's comparable. It's a comparable feel. Like when
I've ca-
Narset
I've
is
cast
on.
plenty of Notion Thieves, but
Yes. Oh, it's
I've
so
never heard
painful.
the Hull Breacher sound. So,
Because at
um,
casual levels, you have like what Aku is saying, where they just put protection. Like I didn't even mean to put. I always play Berserker Greaves. What if I put it on my Drannith Magistrate? And oh god, I have to board wipe, and then I have to be in the right spot in the turn order, and then you have to have no reanimation, and then maybe I get to play my commander, which is not what more casual players want. And then even at an
yeah,
optimized level, no one is running. Like I put Lightning Bolt in almost all of my red decks because there's so many good commanders that are flying around there that it hits.
Mhm.
But people don't want to be casting like you're saying, like Blasphemous Act, or I've seen plenty of bracket 4 decks running Toxic Deluge. They don't want a Toxic Deluge to get rid of Drannith Magistrate. And that
Yeah.
and they probably only have like 7 ways to out it in the whole deck.
Mhm.
It's really powerful. It's
Yeah,
way too powerful.
for 9 out of 10 decks, they need to instantly get rid of it. Their plan, like especially, I mean, really, no, just among all of these tiers,
Yes.
Drannith is going to immediately shut off game plans in a
Yes.
way that's like you might literally not get to play the game. You know, like what if you're just playing Voltron and somebody just slams a turn 2 Drannith and you're like,
Yeah,
oh,
you lose the turn order. You're playing light pause, and you're playing it like a bracket 4, and then someone jams Drannith Magistrate because they have like Daenerys or something as their commander. It's like, okay, I don't want to play this game anyways. On to the next one. Good game,
yeah.
guys. Like it's not outable for a lot. And
There are so few decks that get to say that they just don't need to cast their commander.
yes,
Um, and I think like genuinely, Drannith it's too good, even on that optimized level.
yes,
Like it's also a card that is just almost exclusively a metagame call in itself, which is one of those standards set for the CDH tier. Um, is
which
that
means
you're
it
making
shouldn't be
more of the
below it,
metagame
right?
calls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're having more competitive mindset. And Drannith is not doing anything other than shutting down other people completely.
And it actually gets worse the lower it is, not because it's harder to remove Zen, but because not only it's harder to remove, not only do people have fewer outs in their deck for it, but the person who's using Drannith Magistrate doesn't have the power or the speed to ignore their commander strongly enough to then win the game off that advantage. So you're just stuck in this game that doesn't ever end, where they have an advantage, but they can't accrue it quickly enough to actually put other people out of their misery. It's like it's the stereotype
Well,
of what everyone
not to
thinks
make your
Stacks
point
is.
like a moot point or
Yeah,
anything.
go for it.
But also Drannith is not symmetrical. Drannith is
There
only
you go.
your opponent.
Yeah, there you go.
It is it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really.
You still get to take that lead
Mhm.
in any of these tiers when you cast it.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely insane. Enlightened Tutor, I'll be honest. If Demonic Tutor is in core, like surely Enlightened Tutor is also in core, right?
Yeah.
Like,
you know,
in artifact or enchantment card, there is going to be some guy out there who's like, but my Brea, every time I cast Enlightened Tutor, it goes and it instantly wins off of Scutless, and we're not talking about that, okay? I actually think that maybe you could even just ban this from Exhibition, right? If you want to follow the logic that like Demonic Tutor is any card and Enlightened is kind of like Stoneforge Mystic, which Aku brought up. It's more limited, right? Maybe you just don't want this in Exhibition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it were like how we talked about
it's
Ancient Tomb,
sure.
You know, like it's just generic and it goes against the spirit of what they've given that tier, you know?
Yeah, so
it's kind of like maybe we just don't want it in the one. Like
yes.
it's just something that's taking away from what they're trying to do there.
Yes.
But also it's very strange to have like, you know, we can play. I mean, it does make sense. We can play Enlightened Tutor on the core level where it's not Demonic Tutor.
Yes,
you know,
it's not finding anything.
Any card.
It's not finding anything is the difference. Yeah. And I know there's going to be people who are like, it's fine. Also, what are you looking for? Aku brings up a good point. Like, do you really want to stop people from 95% of the time finding their Soul Ring or Arcane Signet? Like, okay, fine.
You're not like playing Enlightened Tutor into a turn 2 Mystic Remora.
Yes.
In like any of these other
You're
levels.
You're not Rhystic studying
CDH.
off of your Enlightened Tutor or something like that. Not they would, but you know what I mean. Like, that's not the point of what you're doing. So okay, Expropriate. Listen, I think we have. Now, everyone's going to see me put this card all the way up here in CEDH. I don't think Expropriate belongs up in the CEDH ban. No. I actually think... So here, you've heard me say this before, Zan, that I think the game should just end eventually. Please let the game end. I think Expropriate is exactly that. 7 blue for a sorcery that allows people to control whether or not they give you their best thing or an extra turn. That's 9 mana. That's 9 mana. Like, games are supposed to, like, at upgrade level at bracket 3, games are only supposed to last 9 turns. And this has 2 blue pips in it and is sorcery speed. The only downside to not, like, the only reason you could say to me, don't put this in the remove from Game Changers, is I have had this learning experience happen a few too many times, which is where you have to tell the new person, I don't care that they're taking your commander. For the love of God, do not give them time. If you give them an extra turn, I'm not playing with you again. The extra turn is way too powerful. Just give them a thing, right? That's the only reason I could see it be, like, on this list at all, is how many times do you want to have that?
Yeah. Expropriate does also, it just, they have it written down for the brackets where on tier 3 there's just no chaining extra turns.
Sure.
It's a card that's capable of doing it.
Okay.
You know, and yet Time Stretch isn't on this list, but Time Stretch.
Well, we'll get to the
like
things that should be on the list. Yeah. Time
my
Stretch
assumption,
is kind of like
this is a relevant one to bring up because it's like the same. It's the same reasoning that I would have for putting Expropriate on this list, or saying that you can't chain extra turns.
Okay.
For that same reason, why is Time Stretch not here?
Yeah.
It's just 10 mana, take 2 extra turns.
Yeah. I think that
but we're not allowed to chain extra turns together.
I think the difference here is that there is there is the conversation piece that the table can have. Time stretch
Mhm.
literally lets you have no option except to take extra turns,
Yeah, you
right?
just do it twice.
Yeah.
Expropriate has more like potential to do more. It is just a better card.
Yes.
Um,
But I think a
because
lot
of
of
that rule where it
yeah.
like there's just no chaining extra turns amongst tier 3 or below. It just kind of is a card that just goes in tier 3. There's a
You
rule
think
that they
so?
put there.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
I feel
it
like
just
that doesn't happen
unless
if you
we
have
generally
someone.
disagree with the chaining extra turns, then it can't go anywhere other than um 3.
So I
Just because it's a
disagree.
rule for 1, 2, and 3
The
that there's
only
no
thing
chaining
that we're
turns.
changing here for the brackets is the game changers and where they sit. So we're not changing the extra turns rule. The problem I have is that anytime there is a player of some experience at the table, expropriate never gets additional turns, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's going to steal someone's Blight Steel Colossus and start one-shotting people through the extra turns, it's never like getting extra turns. It's getting one, which means it's not chained, right? And I don't think again that that's bad. Like if I pay 9 mana and I get 2 permanents, like just to get 9 mana for 3 permanents and an extra turn, like I don't think that it
Yeah.
actually does. You see what I'm saying? Like, yeah, if everyone
Mhm.
votes time and gives extra turns, that is chaining extra turns, but it's in the control of other people. That's why I would say
Yeah.
just remove it from the game changers. And like, why is expropriate not on the game changers list? Well, because you could just choose not to get royally fucked, right? That's the
Mhm.
that's the actual answer to the question.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think? Are you sold on that? Does that make sense?
If we're going with like we can disagree with that like fundamental one of just no chaining extra turns, then yeah, I can totally see like it should just be taken off. It's
Yeah.
just a big mana sorcery in blue. It's
Yes.
something that they do all the time.
Yes.
Omniscience is literally right there too. Like
Yes.
and
Yes.
omniscience isn't anywhere to be seen here. So I
Yes.
think yeah, expropriate and that rule on the chaining extra turns, it's not a thing that needs to exist here.
Yes. So the next one I want to go over is Fierce Guardianship. I kind of spoiled it by putting it where I think it should go. So the only reason that I think, by the way, we're just assuming everyone knows what these cards are. If you don't, then we can talk about them a little bit. Like if anyone in chat doesn't know, then we can go into them. But I know you know what these cards are, Zan. So Fierce Guardianship. The only reason I wouldn't want it in a precon level is that precons are sold to people who need an access point into Magic, right? And it's very hard to explain to a person who's getting into Magic that we have mana. It's incredibly important. Oh, but shit, there's this card that actually just doesn't care about mana and can come out of nowhere. And it's like an invisible play. Now I know you played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh, so I'm actually going to bring in your
Yeah.
experience there. How does that argument strike you for this? Where would you
Um
put Fierce Guardianship?
I agree with you that it probably should just go in 2.
Okay.
It
In the ban list of
playing
two, by the
against
way. Yeah.
yeah, playing in free things is or playing against free things, sorry.
Yeah.
Um it's not fun unless you're prepared for it. And then in that case it's like to me I still find it fun because theory,
Mm-hmm.
trying to guess what my opponent has. It's just something that's still it's going to catch people off guard. It's just like a random ace in the hole that has no real cost.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is why Pact
it's
of
very
Negation.
easy to have in the lower levels.
Yes. I'll
In
put
the higher levels, there's more removal. Your commander's not going to be online as often.
at a
Um,
tournament level for CEDH, almost everyone is playing blue, unless they're deliberately playing like a Tali or something, where they're choosing not to play blue. So they also all have their own fierce guardianships, right?
yeah,
We're not talking about it too much, but just to put it in perspective, like I would be fine with Pact of Negation not being on the Game Changers list or at exhibition,
Mhm.
but Fierce Guardianship being at bracket 2, right? Just because there is a cost to Pact of Negation that does come later. It's free now, but it affects the game in some way. You're generally not
Yeah.
using it to just stomp the game outright.
Mhm.
No one's ad nauseing to find their pact to cast it so they can Angel's Grace so they can go do
Also,
everything.
largely, counter spells in commander. In a higher level, they are protection
Yes.
for not losing the game by countering your opponent's things, and also like winning the game by countering your opponent's counter spells. And that's totally appropriate. That's just the theme for what's happening there.
Yes.
Um,
You probably.
Upgraded is the tier where like people are probably playing counterspells as counterspells.
Yep.
They're just holding them and making sure that nothing ridiculous happens before they can make something ridiculous happen. And that's permitted in my
Yep.
book.
Well, you're probably not, for instance, at the level where you're worried about things like, but what if they imprint counterspell and they just start, or Pact of Negation, they just start like tapping it off the imprinted device to go ahead. You're already not talking about this bracket 2 area that we're focusing on right
Yeah.
now. Force of Will, I think, just has to live in the same spot. For the same reason. Like you're you're selling precons to people. You don't want them to understand that Magic has mana matter. Oh shit, wait, no, mana doesn't matter if you're these very particular blue cards. I've never seen a person cast Force of Will at a bracket 2 level ever. And there's even a case here that Force of Will should be banned from upgraded. The problem though is that you have so many games according to the bracket methodology. The games are ending in 6 turns. I believe it said for bracket 3. Let me just check here. Yeah. No 2-card combos in the first 6 turns or so. And so the problem is that at that pace of the game of only 6 turns, saying that you can't have counter magic gets really, really kind of fucking like spurious and scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just the same conversation. I don't think there's too much more to go in here. Anything you want to add?
Not really. Free counter spells are just their thing.
Yep.
Force of Will still does, you exile a blue card. Does it matter for how much value it's typically going to have? Probably not, but it still is something. And there's also 2 other players at the table other than the person that you're countering.
So here we go. I have some experience because I actually have owned a guy